Hello, my name is Calvin Robinson, and we are the Dregs. We've got the most diverse bunch of politicos on this podcast right here. I'm going to give everyone a brief introduction before we get started. I am a former Conservative candidate and the former Brexit Party candidate for Broxtowe, standing against Anna Soubry. We've got Joel Davidson, who is a former Conservative councillor and Conservative GLA candidate for Brenton Harrow. What's up, Joel?
Hi, CR. Great to be here again.
Good. We've got Amir Sajady, who is a former Conservative council candidate, former Change UK member, one of Anna Soubry's former colleagues, and he's currently a Lib Dem campaigner. Hi, Amir.
Hi, Calvin. Hi, Hamish. Hi, Joel.
And we've got Hamish Hunter, who is a former Conservative council candidate for Hampstead Town and lost Politico. Is that fair to say, Hamish?
I am of no fixed abode at the moment, but we do seem to have a lot of current former Tories on this.
We've all at least been a Tory at some point or another, and I think Joel is the only one that is still a Conservative Party member.
Very proud to be. Very proud to be.
Oh, please. So it's a good place to start. Let's talk about the manifestos that have launched this week. Obviously, the Conservative one is the most recent one. So if we jump straight in with that, if anyone's got any good points about it before we get to the negatives, that'd be fantastic to know.
Well, I mean, the first thing that I noticed was this is the most defensive Tory manifesto that I have seen in a very long time. And in fact, the way that this has been positioned is essentially a direct continuation of the anti-Corbyn strategy that has been going on for so long. This is literally saying we are not Corbyn. I mean, what we're seeing here is just a holding government, really saying we're not going to increase taxes, and we're going to give a little bit more money to the NHS, and we're going to give a little bit more money to reverse the police cuts that we did in the first place. Other than that, it's really pretty unambitious. I mean, potentially that is obviously smart compared to the disaster of the May manifesto. So, but I would consider this situation to be akin to living in a fairly substandard flat, but next door being on fire. So okay. You'd probably rather be where you are. But I mean, that is frankly about as good as it gets for the manifesto. And also, I was very concerned on a current point about the situation in China, and the foreign policy side was completely ignored in that manifesto, but we can come on to that later. But I think in terms of the core message of tax and spend, it was really, really ambitious for me.
Okay, so Hamish or Amir, do you have any positive aspects from the manifesto you'd like to talk about before we dump on it?
Well, no, look, in comparison to 2017, it is much better. I remember canvassing in your old ward, Calvin, Swiss Cottage in Camden, the day that the Tory manifesto came out in 2017, and one Conservative said to me, I won't name them to save their embarrassment, but they said to me, "Oh, I think it's great. We are a sort of Christian Democrat party now, and you libertarians are just going to have to put up with it." And of course,
what an idiot.
We know how that ended up. I mean, I think broadly they're playing the right game. Everyone's talking about the comparisons between 2017. I actually see in this manifesto more comparisons with 2010, or rather, 2015, where it was very play it safe, repeat the same message. People were saying it was boring, but it got through. And really, let's be honest, no one's looking at the manifestos that deeply. This is a Brexit election, and that's how people are going to be voting in the main.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I would probably say I agree with all of that. I think it's a much more positive manifesto than the last one, which is not difficult because the last one was so bad. But I am worried about it. I think we're trying to outspend Labour, and you can never outspend the socialists. I think there's a lot of spending in this manifesto, and that's trying to neutralise the damage of the messaging around austerity, which is completely wrong because we should have been selling austerity. And we weren't at all, and we never have really figured out a way to positively sell Conservative values. We are the party of, we should be defending liberty and prosperity and property, and we don't do any of those things, and we don't shout about those things at all. And that's what I want to see more of in the Conservative Party. I want to see them talking for democracy and capitalism, deregulation in a positive light. I'm not sure this manifesto does that, but it is a lot better than the last one.
I mean, on the positive note, I do like how the Conservative manifesto has pledged support for the armed forces. I think it's very important.
Yes.
Has it though?
Yeah.
Well, at least
this
Preeti's
is the
saying
thing.
that they're not going to keep chasing after and prosecuting people from.
I mean, they made an
Sure, I
attempt.
mean, thank God for that. But I mean, this is what I'm saying, that we're claiming as wins just things that are just defending the current position. That is seen as somehow a support of the armed forces, to say that we're not going to let armed forces go lower than they currently are. So all of these are just taking the very worst case, scenario and saying we're not going to do that, without really a commitment to the armed forces, I wouldn't say. Yes, again, he's not Corbyn, who's not in favour of the armed forces and supports the IRA. Of course, we're not that, and that's a great thing. But again, I don't really see anything positive to support the armed forces, really.
Well, I mean, they've got some kind of like freebies, like the veterans rail cards. They have
we should have that anyway. But
I mean, that should have been part of Conservative policy from decades ago. So finally,
I mean, I really like the raising of the threshold again with removing national insurance. That's really good. And that, to be fair, we didn't make enough of raising the threshold, the income tax threshold in the first place, up to 12,500. That kind of thing. And again, it really frustrated me that May was never able to make the case for that. But that's a really good policy.
I do wonder if I mean, I'm not suggesting that we get rid of Trident, but I do wonder if there is a cheaper, more kind of 21st century way of defending ourselves.
All right, Corbyn, I think on that note, let's talk about the Labour manifesto.
No, I'm not suggesting that we get rid of nuclear weapons because it's a deterrent and we have to be ready to defend our country. I'm just saying that Trident is expensive. It's very expensive. Is it necessary? I don't know.
Perhaps, but let's talk about the manifestos that we're seeing. The Conservative one, we're all pretty happy about it because it's not a bad manifesto, even though we're not shouting about how good it is. Let's talk about the Labour one, which I think we can all probably agree is terrible, absolutely horrendous.
Well, actually, there's one aspect of the Labour manifesto which I was really pleased to see, trying to be positive about the other side. They are committing to repeal the Fixed Terms Parliament Act, which must go down as one of the most appalling, terrible pieces of legislation that has been passed. It is a classic example of constitutional vandalism. It was deliberately passed purely to keep the coalition government of 2010 to 2015 in place. And as we have seen over the past year, really does not work. And if we can get rid of that, then that'll be great. Apart from, I mean, I struggle to find anything else good to say about the Labour Party manifesto.
Are you not happy to have poor people paying for your broadband, Hamish?
Well, I mean, the problem with that is that it's a great headline-grabbing policy. And when you ask people, do you want free broadband? They say, absolutely, I want free broadband. But when you ask people, do you want the government to run your broadband? They say, no, they don't. And people realise it's not realistic. People realise that it's probably going to be quite bad. And also, when you've got the Labour Party saying that the NHS is in crisis, there are people using food banks, we've got a crisis in adult social care, to then turn around and say, oh, we're going to spend loads of money on free broadband for everyone. Yeah. I think people can see that is just bizarre. Yeah.
I'll tell you what else is bizarre is in Labour's manifesto and creepy is their foray into foreign affairs in the wrong way. They're making pronouncements on things like Jammu and Kashmir, not mentioning anything about the genocide of Muslims in China. But then obviously
a million Muslims are being held.
Not mentioning anything about that. We'll come on to whether the Conservatives are doing that, of course, is another question and potentially another topic in itself. But they do that. They obviously then also venture into the Middle East on one side by proposing essentially BDS policies for certain conflicts, but not others in the Middle East. So very worrying things there. I mean, other than that, look, it's the same old crackpot, Labour hard left stuff that that everyone knows about, and that's why, as I said, this is very much a national election on one issue.
But John, you're an accountant. Does it not bother you that the IFS have come out to say these numbers just don't add up?
Well, they do add up in the sense that they would just require enormous tax increases to fund them. So, and the impact of that on the subsidiary impact of that on the economy is unquantifiable. Really, it's enormous. So, it's always the derivative, if you like, effects of the initial contraction that then causes wider problems in the economy. That then causes a negative spiral with it, which then affects interest rates. Everything ultimately, bond prices, etc., etc. So once confidence is lost in the economy, then all bets are off, and all forecasts are going to be completely wrong, and then the real life impact in monetary terms is then going to be worse and worse. So that's obviously going to happen under a Corbyn government as well. Yeah. But again, that's sort of baked in. So I'm not sure his coalition are too worried about it.
It isn't costed because the 58 billion pounds that they're going to give the WASPy women isn't accounted for. Right. So I mean,
that's on top of the manifesto, isn't it? He's just making things up now.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Well, it does throw the whole manifesto under the bus. That late policy.
It's not a manifesto that's grounded in reality. It's grounded in their belief that the state can and should provide absolutely everything,
and in control of everything.
In control of everything, yeah. So it's and to a certain electorate, I suppose that it has does live in that way. That has a certain appeal. But other than that, it's either an ideological commitment to socialism that keeps people interested. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously, doesn't.
What I don't understand is that in 2017, the Labour manifesto was quite radical, and they didn't win.
They did re-energise, I suppose, a very left-wing base in this country. Maybe.
I mean, in 2017, it was very obvious that people were re-energised because for the first time in a long time, they heard that tuition fees were going to get abolished, and also the Conservatives' Theresa May's manifesto was dreadful. So I think that was the catalyst for the Labour surge in 2017. The fact that Labour didn't win in 2017, they didn't win that election. They didn't come out with a majority. And for them to come with a manifesto, it's even more radical than the 2017 manifesto. It just shows you that these people are nuts.
Speaking about people being nuts, let's talk about the Lib Dem manifesto now. Because this is very... What, Joel, what?
No, it's there's some strange stuff in there. Yeah.
So, I mean, I had a read through it, and to me, it stood out as very left wing, very pro taxes, very anti democracy. So, before I dump on this one, I'd love to hear Amir's thoughts on why this is a good manifesto, being the House Lib Dem.
I think it's important that we edge away from the extremes, and on the conservative in the Conservative manifesto, there's tax cuts. The Labour Party manifesto, there's tax increases, and I think the Lib Dem manifesto gets a steady balance right there in the middle. It isn't a left-wing manifesto. It's not a right-wing manifesto. It's a centrist manifesto, and I think that appeals to a large portion of the population who can't identify in the current political climate with either the Conservative Party or the Labour Party. So you say that it's a left-wing manifesto, but it isn't, because 1% increase in income tax to ring-fence that money for the NHS, I think that's fair. I think most people would agree that the NHS is failing, that accident and emergency wait times are at record highs, and something needs to be done. And none of the solutions are not found in the Conservative manifesto or the Labour Party manifesto.
But what is the solution in the Lib Dem one, other than to raise taxes? How is that going to solve the NHS?
Well, it's a big start, because the NHS needs money.
But the Tories are saying they spend more in the NHS.
It isn't just about money. It's also about the Lib Dem manifesto is the cornerstone, the foundation of the Lib Dem manifesto is remaining in the EU. So when you remain in the EU, the economic projections for the country allow a large sum of money to be reinvested back into the country. And that is how this manifesto is different and better than the Conservative or the Labour Party manifesto.
I think we need to come to Hamish on this one because I can see him pulling some funny faces. What do you think?
The only part of the Lib Dem manifesto that has cut through to me, and I suspect has cut through to anyone else, is their position on Brexit. So frankly, it doesn't really matter if they're putting a penny on income tax, they're spending a bit more on education, they're going to, use or not use Trident. On the bus, on the leaflets, on the airways, they are talking stop Brexit. Now, that's not a bad strategy to be a single issue party, because they want to attract the Labour metropolitan Remainers in constituencies like mine, as well as the soft Remainer Conservatives in the southwest and in some of the suburban places. But what has astonished me about the Lib Dem campaign so far is they really have not taken that opportunity. You've got the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, who has said very clearly last week that he will remain neutral on the question of a second referendum. Now, that is an extraordinary position for him to take, and it should be manna from heaven for the Liberal Democrats. They should be going hammer and tongs at this issue to pick up all those metropolitan Remainer voters, but they're not. They're sort of shilly-shallying around this idea that Joe Swinson may or may not be Prime Minister, when actually nobody is really listening to their wider portfolio. Yeah. But they're squandering this opportunity as far as I can see.
And it's the same, well, it's somewhat similar to what the Conservatives have done with their manifesto, very unambitious. They don't need to do anything because the alternative is so disastrous. In the Lib Dems case, it's such a binary election, they could easily have said, we are the only party who wants to remain and we will have a second referendum and campaign to remain on this particular deal, because we think that remaining in the EU is better than this deal. And they would have then occupied that entire space from second referendum right back into revoke and joining the euro and everything else, would have then had to vote Lib Dem, because they would have occupied that space. So they really have missed an opportunity by being so extreme with that one headline policy.
I mean, I think you make a good point, Hamish. There was an opportunity that has potentially been missed here. The Lib Dems are very passionate about the EU, and for them, remaining has so many benefits in comparison to the Theresa May's deal or Boris Johnson's deal. Brexit is a cliff edge, and on the other side, we just don't know how Brexit will pan out.
VR trigger, cliff edge.
It's fine. It's the word.
Ring a bell.
We don't know if Brexit is going to be a success. We don't know if Brexit is going to be a failure. Whereas with the Liberal Democrats,
but we do know that staying in the EU will be a failure, because we can see the direction that the EU is travelling in. But regardless of all of that, whatever the Lib Dems stance on Brexit is, do you not think the core issue here is that it's undemocratic to be going against the results of the referendum? And this is the party that's got democratic in its name. I don't understand.
No, we live in a representative democracy. We're not accustomed to referendums. It's not part of our makeup in this country.
Fine, but we had one.
But it's not. It's not part of it's not part of our makeup. It's not part of our responsibilities. We elect representatives who represent us, and they do all the business, and we just get on with our lives.
The Liberal Democrats are the ones that have been campaigning for a referendum since as long as I can remember. We finally had one. They lost it, and now they're backtracking on delivering on.
Well, we can go back and talk about how it all happened and whose fault it was. And
I'm not bothered about the fault. I'm just worried about why they can't stick to delivering the results of it.
Well, let me ask you something. In the Scottish referendum, EU citizens were allowed to vote, whereas in this referendum, in the UK the EU referendum, they weren't. So there is a bit of an inconsistency there.
I'd like to step in to sort of defend the Liberal position and what Amir is saying, because whilst I don't agree that we should have a further referendum, second referendum, people's vote, whatever you want to call it, I do think that if a Liberal Democrat government won a majority, or if they if they managed to form a government, they would be entitled to hold that referendum, and they would be entitled to put whatever question that they had got on the ballot. But what I think is slightly perhaps coming as a surprise to the Liberal Democrats is how extreme a lot of people think that this revoke position is. Now, I've just said previously a few minutes ago that it's not a bad strategy, and it isn't a bad strategy from going up from 15, 20 seats to going up to 40 seats. But actually, I don't know a single Leave voter who still wants to leave, who wants this second referendum. I don't see amongst the Leave voters a great sort of regret at having voted to leave. Now, there's lots of different ways you can leave the European Union, and there are lots of different options. But I don't sense a great deal of remorse, or whatever you want to call it. And I actually see that people are a bit annoyed that we haven't actually got on and done something, and a sense in this country that whether or not referendums are part of our political culture or not, we had a vote, and votes in this country should mean something. And if they don't, it's really bad news for the quality of our democracy.
No, they should mean. Votes should mean something. Elections should mean something, and they should not be ignored.
But then what we're arguing now, it should be about what type of Brexit do we want. We've decided we want to leave. We should be saying option 1, option 2, option 3. But all we've got is the Conservatives saying we will take you out. Everyone else is saying, actually, we'll revoke, or we'll remain, or we'll have a referendum again. Where are the options?
There was consensus in Parliament for a very soft version of Brexit.
There wasn't, though. There
was consensus, but the Conservative Party whipped their MPs, and they voted against any kind of alternative Brexit.
I don't think anyone believes that any of the MPs who voted against the timetable were voting in good faith and would have voted for Brexit subsequently. Really, I don't think anyone really believes that. Anyone who voted against those amendments, the government's amendments, was essentially saying they wanted to delay it. Of course they were.
If we were to replay time, with all of those Conservative MPs who were ejected from the Conservative Party, it is highly likely.
But even those, but I think what made that worse was that the same discipline should have applied to the other Conservative MPs who didn't vote for the third reading of Theresa May's bill, because it was just simply exerting party discipline, which parties are supposed to do. It was the lack of discipline under May that had set up this problem in the first place, and had destroyed the Tory party's reputation for competence and basic ruthlessness, really, which is a good thing if you're trying to win elections and run countries. But if you're seen as being completely incompetent and unable to even exert discipline in your own party, then the country just don't respect that. And we consistently see that with the Conservatives. We lose support when this team is dithering.
Joel, I think we're on the precipice of something very dangerous here, because the new Conservative MPs that will be elected to Parliament will be living in absolute fear. If they rebel against the government for whatever reason, they will be ejected. This is exactly what has happened, and this is the precedent that has been set.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of
parliamentarians,
how can a Conservative MP represent their locality when they have to take the party whip at every vote?
I think I'm going to wrap this one up, guys, because we started talking about the manifestos and we've drifted gradually into the MPs. So if we take a few seconds, I'll start a new topic.
Well, actually, I'd like to talk about the Brexit Party briefly.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm going to throw some shade at you, mate.
Cool, do it.
Of course, Calvin, you're our sort of Brexit Party representative. You were Conservative, but you decided to go and stand for the Brexit Party in Broxtowe, which I completely respect, you following your principles and going to do that. But you were stood down by Nigel Farage because he wasn't standing against any Conservative-held seats. So it's not really a national party anymore. And with Boris and the Conservatives saying we're going to get Brexit done by the 31st, what on earth is the point of the Brexit Party, apart from maybe splitting the Leave vote and allowing some Labour and Liberals to win instead of Brexit supporters?
Good question. I think it was absolutely the right thing to do, to step down in Conservative seats. to make sure that we do get a Conservative majority so we can get Brexit done. But I think it would be amazing if we could have a handful up to a dozen of Brexit Party MPs in Parliament to hold the Conservatives to account and ensure that we do get Brexit and they don't go wishy-washy.
But it doesn't help, CR, when your leader says in interviews casually that he might not even bother voting. It's things like that make people think that, that people, hard-working campaigners like you who do have principles, who, really want to make a difference. It makes people feel that you've been working for a leader who's not really serious at all. I mean, how can a leader of a party not stand for election, in a general election campaign? I mean, that's just unprecedented.
It is, and I would think the answer to that would be that it's never been a national party. It's never been a party looking to take government, to hold government. I think it's a party that has been a protest group. It's a party that is a lobbyist party, a pressure group. All of these things that have been around just to make sure that we get Brexit done. Literally, it's not been about anything else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, and I think your campaign has been excellent. I do hope that that it works in Broxbourne. Of course, we want the right result there.
Broxbourne. What concerns me is that it seems to be that Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson have, behind the scenes, made some kind of agreement, and all it tells the public is that the Conservative Party is no longer the Conservative Party, the One Nation Tory Party, but it's basically the Conservative Brexit Party.
I'm sorry, but that's absolute nonsense, Amir, because if you look at what's happened, right? We saw Nigel Farage stand all his candidates down, 317 seats in a massive gesture towards the Conservative Party. It wasn't reciprocated. He's thrown his toys out of the pram as a result. We've seen him in the national media over the last week crying about the fact that the Conservatives won't do the same thing in return and stand Conservatives down in seats that they've never won, which would be a nice move, but you can't expect it, especially of a party the longest running Democratic Party in history. So I don't think it's right that they should assume that one party would stand down just because another did, and I don't think that is any way a sign that a deal has been made.
But isn't that just all part of the act? Isn't this that's the perception that they're trying to project, so that people don't doubt any kind of negotiation or deal that's been made behind the scenes?
No, because it's harmful.
They play this theatre in public, so then they get what they want, yet no one questions or they don't have to answer to anyone, and a hard form of Brexit is finally achieved.
No, because what Farage is doing now is actually harmful to the Conservatives, so it's not helpful to any kind of deal.
Did he not say to the Conservative Party that the withdrawal agreement, it must not be extended, otherwise I will stand candidates against
It's the other way around. So Boris said that I won't extend the transition period, and that is when Farage stood all his candidates down.
So there was some kind of concession, there was some kind of dealing between the two to make that happen.
No, he saw a consequence that he agreed with and followed through on it.
I think one of the areas which Amir is probably right about is that the Conservative Party is now the Conservative Brexit Party. I just cannot see a situation where the Conservative Party nationally stands on a manifesto that isn't leaving the European Union. And I think that what we have seen over the past year is that the Conservative core vote and the Conservative membership are very committed to leaving the European Union. That is what they want. And if they don't get that from the Conservative Party, as the European Union elections showed us in May, they are happy to jump ship. And we all seem to have forgotten about those elections which took place earlier this year. The Conservative Party got about 10-11% in a national election, which is frankly extraordinary. It's frankly extinction territory. And one of the things that Boris has been very good at is riding the wave of not having left on the 31st of October. But I've absolutely no doubt that if we somehow failed to leave the European Union under a Conservative government, that support will leak away. So in some senses, that Amir is right. The Conservative Party is now a Brexit party, and I think that probably accounts for the complete disintegration in the actual Brexit Party's vote and support.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the reason I became a Brexit Party candidate, because I saw October 31st, do or die, came and went. Brexit wasn't achieved, and that was just one too many delays. I thought more people would be sympathetic to that. I thought more people would be upset by that. They weren't, which is a good thing. Boris has managed to turn it around, like you say, and owned the issue because he was dealing with the consequences that were out of his control.
Well, he was taken to court. I mean,
he knew that there was
Heaven
no
forbid.
way.
The getting away with the October 31st is incredible, but I mean, it's part of a pattern of what the Conservatives have got away with. I mean, 3.5 years we've been unable, incapable, or unwilling to deliver Brexit, and we're still seen as the only party that can deliver it. So it's quite an extraordinary election in that way.
It is.
A national binary election where it's one thing or the other, much like a court case, actually, one verdict or the other. But then you get. But I think with just that sort of transactional relationship with voters, which Hamish talks about there, stores up problems for the future, because then it becomes less of a coherent set of policies and ideologies, and we're seeing that, I think, with the complete absence of any focus on foreign policy at the moment, which is bizarre because we focus on Brexit. Yeah. We don't actually focus on the enormous foreign policy challenges that are going on at the moment.
So Joel raised the important question. Before we get into foreign policy, he raised the important question of, is this the Brexit election? Is that the only issue that matters?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is. Because of that, we're seeing, the Conservatives able to get away with a very, very modest manifesto because they literally stand for Brexit. So if you believe in Brexit, and if you're happy with it, if you do want it to be delivered, literally that message has landed that the only party that can do it is the Conservatives. So whatever else they offer is almost by the by.
It's not even if you believe in Brexit, it's also if you're a Democrat and you want to get it done so you can move on to the important issues.
So that message has landed, definitely.
Well, Amir has been in Chelsea and Fulham for the Liberal Democrats. I'd be intrigued to hear what he thinks about former Tories or soft Tories and whether they're going to the Liberals. But from what I can hear and see, I know a lot of people, a lot of colleagues, a lot of friends who are completely anti-Brexit. They would support a revoke position. But then you can sort of see the cogs turning in their mind as this election goes on, and they start to think, yeah, I don't like Brexit, but I really don't like Jeremy Corbyn. I really don't want him in government. And I'm thinking about economics, I'm thinking about tax, jobs, and all of these things. And suddenly, yeah, Brexit, but Boris has got a deal, and I think that's really helped him, by the way. I think that's absolutely really helped him. And maybe, I don't know, maybe a lot of people are going to actually think at the end of the day, when they get to the ballot booth, I'm going to vote Conservative because if I vote Liberal and indulge my sort of Brexit derangement, I'm going to let in Jeremy Corbyn.
I've been knocking on the doors non-stop now for over 2 months every day in mostly in Fulham, but it's Chelsea Fulham constituency. And a large portion of the responses have been, we're scared of Corbyn. And what's interesting for me is that it's not just coming from soft Tories or from Conservatives, it's coming from Labour Party members as well. Yeah. So I'm knocking on the door, someone opens the door, they say I'm Labour, but I'm not sure if I'm going to vote Labour this time. They're actually thinking about not voting, and a lot of people have turned around and are so frustrated with politics that they're actually contemplating not voting for the first time in their lives.
It's a very painful thing to do. I don't think that, you'd hope someone would actually ultimately end up voting. But yeah.
That's why we knock on doors. That's why we're out canvassing. That's why we're here debating politics, because we care about democracy and about our country. And just to go back to the point that you made earlier, Calvin, democracy, or you said that you're a Democrat, but democracy is not a one-time.
Oh, please don't give me that. I can't bear it. I can't flip and bear it.
No, but the democracy is perpetual.
I can't bear these flipping Lib Dem taglines. I've just played the button on YouTube to hear it over and over again. Democracy is not a one-time event. Democracy is currently occurring.
Have we crashed out yet? Have we crashed out? No.
Anyway, to come back to what we're talking about now, which is knocking on the doorstep. So
knocking on the doorsteps.
I've also been out and about. I've been from.
What's interesting is that a lot of Conservatives are considering to vote Lib Dem. Okay, so one of the reasons why they're hesitating is simply because of Jeremy Corbyn. They're impartial towards Labour, but they can't stand Jeremy Corbyn. They can't stand his ties with the IRA. They can't stand his ties with Hamas and with the Hezbollah. They can't stand his association with left-wing Marxists, basically, and they just are afraid. I was canvassing a family, and he said to me, if Jeremy Corbyn comes into power, within 3 months we're going to sell our house and we're going to leave, me and all my children and my whole family. And I was really disappointed and upset, not because of his opinion, because he has a right to his opinion. I was disappointed and upset that we're living in a country in a time now where people feel that way. And Jeremy Corbyn has basically done nothing about anti-Semitism. He's done nothing about the discrimination and the bullying that's happening in his party. And what's more, he keeps on lying and saying, "Oh, I've done everything that I can," or we're investigating all of the complaints. And people can see through that. People aren't stupid, Jeremy Corbyn. People know that you're lying. People know that you're not taking action. Otherwise, why are Labour MPs leaving?
I think you found something we can all agree on. But talking about knocking on the doors, the thing I'm worried about, because I've been knocking on doors from Beaconsfield up to Newcastle, and I'm seeing consistently, my canvas sheets are full of C's and P's, and I get barely any S's. I get no S's, and that's worrying to me. That's not exciting, because that tells me that we're going to see something very similar to what we saw in the last couple of elections with the shy Tories, but the other way around. I think there's still a lot of Labour support out there, but they're embarrassed about the party. They're embarrassed about the state of their leader. But come election day, come polling day, they're going to put that cross in that socialist box.
Yeah, I think we're going to definitely see a lot of that. I mean, this is such an extreme Labour Party, as we've seen. It's a decent party that's been taken over by a group of people who were once seen as extremely beyond the pale, even by the standards of the Labour Party, even by the standards of the left of the Labour Party. It was seen as unimaginable. Basically, every year, as someone from the far left would challenge for the Labour leadership, historically, it was Jeremy Corbyn's turn, and he randomly won it because the other candidates were appalling and a confluence of circumstances. But anyway, he's been a complete extremist from his entire career, so there's no surprise to me. And his dislike of Jews is absolutely terrifying, obviously, for me personally. My father grew up telling me about these far left people who were anti-Semitic, who took over the Labour Party in the early 80s. The very same people, literally right now, who are now in charge of the Labour Party. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's a really worrying, hostile thing, you know, and it's become quite personal to people who are still prepared to vote Labour. Now, despite that association, it's a very difficult thing for a lot of people to admit. I would imagine people who think they're decent themselves. So. Yeah, this is going to be the first election, I think, potentially ever, that people are going to be ashamed to be associated with the left-wing party, whereas normally, of course, people are ashamed to be seen as sort of associated with the greedy right-wing party.
One of the things that's really concerned me is this reliance that the Conservatives seem to be placing on these Labour Leave voters. We saw the same thing in 2017, and we're seeing that now, where we hear, oh, the Conservatives are going to win Bishop Auckland, the Conservatives are going to win Darlington, the Conservatives are going to win Clwyd South. These are seats that, if they have been Conservative ever, haven't been Conservative in a long, long time. And I just worry that the Conservative Party has thought, well, we're going to lose St Albans, we're going to lose Richmond Park, we're going to lose some of these more Remain seats in the West Country, but that's okay because we're going to make these huge gains in parts of the country that have never been Conservative or haven't for a very long time. And it's a very difficult strategy. But even if it works this time, once we have left the European Union, What are we offering them?
I know.
Well, as we've said, nothing, because the manifesto is so unambitious.
But how?
So yes, as a tactic to win this one election, fine. But what happens afterwards?
Yeah, we lose the traditional Tories, or they lose the traditional Tories in St Albans and all those places who are sort of, and they get used to not voting Conservative, and we rely on votes from these, typically unconservative places. Yeah. But then then we're going to turn around and ask them to vote for some sort of Thatcherite, Singapore on the sea, conservatism. We're going to end up with no seats. It's just really, it strikes me as a very dangerous shift.
Well, I've been in those areas like Bishop Auckland, campaigning for the Brexit Party, and I've spoken to a lot of people around Nottinghamshire in particular that they want to get Brexit done, but in their hearts they're Labour supporters, and they just can't bring themselves to vote Tory. It's a tribal, historic thing, which is why a lot of them wanted to go Brexit Party, and with them out of the picture, I don't know what's going to happen in these seats.
Yeah.
The ones you mentioned, the Wets who are going to the Lib Dems, I think maybe they'll do that because of this election for Brexit, but I do think they'll come back to the Tories. Bob Bruce is a one nation Tory at heart, isn't he? He can reunite the party after Brexit.
He's not a one nation Tory at heart. He's a self-serving opportunist at heart.
Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister.
Boris. Oh, right. Well, yeah, I mean, the Lib Dems, they had one good policy on business rates, didn't they, Amir? Saying they're going to scrap business rates long-term.
The Conservatives have been abysmal with regards to business rates.
That's one thing where I get a lot of stick for, but saying I like that policy.
The high streets are failing. The Conservatives do absolutely nothing, and the Lib Dems come up with a policy which might actually save all our high streets in the UK all in one go.
Look, I like that, but I just don't like the undemocrat bit, of cancelling the referendum. It's just a silly thing to say.
We're going back to.
Okay, well, let's not get back to that. Isn't the problem with the Liberal Democrats fundamentally is that if there is,
I thought he was going to say Joe Swinson, but carry on.
Well, no, I am going to say that. I'm going to start again so you can edit this out.
I have a rebuttal.
Good. The problem with the Liberal Democrats fundamentally is if Joe Swinson is in a position to be the kingmaker between Boris and Jeremy Corbyn, we know that she is going to support Jeremy Corbyn. She's going to vote for his budget so she can get her little undemocratic referendum. And that means she's going to vote through a Corbyn budget. And the Scots Nats are going to do the same with a second independence referendum. So that's the problem. I think that's the problem that a lot of soft Tories might actually be waking up to and thinking, well, this woman's a conduit to a nasty old communist Jew hater.
And I think that is a good place to wrap this conversation up.
Well, no, I think Amir should be given a right reply to that.
I mean, I was not a Lib Dem member when Joe Swinson became.
You were in Plaid Cymru at the time, weren't you?
I think she needs to do a lot more than just show she's not terrible. She's not completely appalling, and they should have ruled out a coalition with Corbyn because of his values.
They have ruled out a coalition with Corbyn. They've ruled out a coalition with Corbyn and with Johnson.
They should rule it out because of his values and say they won't support his crazy.
Let Amir say.
Yeah. Joe Swinson has said categorically that she would not form a coalition with either of the two parties. She would deal on an issue-by-issue basis with a view of a second referendum. Now, the Lib Dem position on the second referendum has always been absolute. They voted for a second referendum 17 times in Parliament. They won a second referendum. The reason why they won a second referendum is because of the mess that we're in now. The only way to get out of this mess, in their view, is to stop Brexit. And I don't think that, even though you'll make fun of the Lib Dems for being undemocratic, it's not undemocratic to have a point of view and to debate it and to argue it and to bring it to the press and bring it to the media and to bring it to the public and try and they're not taking over the city centre with guns and stones. They're trying to win it on the public.
Is it worth putting Jeremy Corbyn in number 10 to get that? Because that's what we know is what's going to happen.
I find it highly unlikely that after the first coalition, the coalition with David Cameron, and all of the backlash that came from that, that the Liberal Democrats will form another coalition. I think they received the message well, loud and clear.
They're power hungry. They won't call it a coalition. They'll call it supply and demand or something ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. Jo Swinson can sit on the opposition benches, not sitting around the cabinet table with Jeremy Corbyn. So she doesn't have that sort of horrible imaging, but she'll still vote for his budget.
Well, that's not true. Look, there was an opportunity before October the 31st, before the Brexit delay. There was an opportunity for Jo Swinson to form some sort of unity government with Jeremy Corbyn at the head to stop or to delay Brexit and to call a referendum. She didn't do that. So the fact that she hasn't done that, the fact that she hasn't made a deal with Jeremy Corbyn, they proposed people like Harriet Harman, Kenneth Clark to lead a unity government, but Jeremy Corbyn wouldn't have it. So I find it highly unlikely that the Liberal Democrats will go into a coalition with
either way, 40 seats, 40, 50 seats will be really powerful in the next parliament. So then even getting to that would be very very interesting if the Lib Dems were to get to that sort of level with having those sort of numbers in Parliament.
And it's possible because, honestly, I mean, Chelsea Fulham is traditionally it's a Conservative safe seat, but I mean, 4 out of 10 people that I speak to are considering to vote Lib Dem. And even though the poll recently came out, the sample size was very small. It was about 600. You can't judge an election from a small sample size poll by one pollster.
Listen, I think Amir's made some good points and held his own, but I don't want this to become a us versus the Lib Dems podcast. So let's talk about what we're looking forward to in this general election. Start with you, Hamish. What are you most looking forward to?
Well, in some senses, what I'm most looking forward to has already happened because we've seen quite a few good people get selected in some good seats, and we've seen quite a few interesting people not get selected. Which is always nice. But look, what I'm really looking forward to is we haven't had our big moment. We haven't had our Gillian Duffy moment. We haven't had our we're all right Neil Kinnock moment. And frankly, I think this election, although the Conservatives are doing quite well, and they're probably quite surprised at how well they're doing, I'm looking forward to a bit of a game-changing, exciting moment that will stir things up.
Okay. How about you, Joel?
Well, I am, despite what you and Hamish would say, looking forward to leaving the European Union, and I genuinely am.
It's good to hear you're back on board.
Under almost any guise, obviously.
Well, no, we know that.
Exactly.
You'd get any deal, wouldn't you?
in my deal, yeah, proudly Brino. But so I am genuinely looking forward to what I think is inevitable, which is Boris will get his majority to get this deal through. I think that would be a historic moment, and it's what I wanted for Theresa May to be able to do, but she was obviously unable to sell it. I think it would be virtually identical to that. So the outcome of Boris getting that majority is something that I will look forward to. I look forward to some of the further policy issues coming up. You never know 2 weeks is a long time in politics. There's some real pressing foreign policy challenges as well for the candidates to answer and for all the major parties to answer. As I said, personally, I would like to see a lot more of a focus from the government on what's happening in Hong Kong. I think it's a diabolical situation that's only going to get worse. So it'll be very interesting to see how that affects the campaign. As I said, absolutely no mention of foreign policy virtually in the Conservative manifesto, which is surprising, given that this is supposed to be a Brexit election. It seems very transactional, but obviously let's get it done anyway. But we are, as discussed tonight, storing up a number of very interesting problems further down the road.
Okay. And Amir?
I honestly would look forward to an independent investigation on racism in this country, on Islamophobia and on anti-Semitism and all other kinds of discrimination that happens in politics and outside of politics. I think we should not live in a society in modern day 21st century Britain where we can tolerate racism, where we tolerate this kind of behavior. For me, the reality is that, if you're a Brexiter, if you're a Remainer, if you're Lib Dem, if you're Brexit Party, if you're Conservative, if you're Labour Party, you're not my enemy, as these other parties might phrase it. we're citizens of the same country. You know, we should work together and get along and knock heads and come to some sort of mutual consensus. That's the kind of Britain that I want to live in, and it's not going to happen if these forms of racism are just ignored and ignored and ignored and continuously just ignored, and where people are racist and they're suspended for 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, and then they're just reinstated into positions of influence and power. And this is absolutely abhorrent, and I can't stand it, but I will campaign against it every single day of my life.
Wow, okay, that was good. Mine seems meagre in comparison, but I'm most looking forward to Darren Henry kicking out Subri and Joy Morrissey kicking out Grieve, and seeing all of these Ramonas who have been frustrating the will of the British people losing their seats, and seeing some good, solid Tories replace them.
As many Labour seats lost as possible would be fantastic as well.
That would be very good, yes. So that's been a good podcast. I think we've had some good, solid discussions there. On the next one, we're probably going to talk about foreign policy, because I can tell Joel really wants to discuss China, and it's a very important issue. So do tune into the next one. I've been Calvin. We've had Joel, Hamish, and Amir. Thank you very much for watching. See you on the next one.
Good night.
I like your bookshelf, Hamish. I'm sorry.
Bye, Hamish.
Shall we say hello to some friends of the show? We already got a bit of we already got some feedback from one of Calvin's friends saying that there was too much chin. I feel shamed by that, frankly.
Where is the man's chin?
He must be talking about me. But, yeah.